Following their perilous flight from the Isstvan system, the survivors of the Death Guard frigate Eisenstein found refuge within the fleet of Rogel Dorn, the Primarch of the Imperial Fists. The designated Praetorian of Terra had returned them to the throne world, where the incredible tale they told had been confirmed beyond all doubt. The War Master Horus, the most beloved of the Emperor's sons, had risen in rebellion against his father. Even worse, 3 other Primarchs had joined his attempt to seize the Imperial throne for himself. After consultation with Malcador the Sigillite, Dorn had assumed responsibility for commanding the Emperor's loyal forces against the traitors. Dorn had decided that the Imperial response would be swift and savage. 7 full Space Marine legions were ordered to rendezvous in the Isstvan system and assault Horus and his co-conspirators at their fortified base on the 5th planet. Ferrus Manus, the fierce Primarch of the Iron Hands, was ordered to lead the assault and serve as its chief strategist. It was a task the Gorgon welcomed with relish. The time had come to avenge the unthinkable betrayal of Fulgrim, the man who had once been his brother and best friend. The first of the Loyalist forces to arrive in system were those of the Primarchs Corvus, Corax, and Vulkan. Corax was the pale-skinned, dark-eyed commander of the Raven Guard Legion. He had been raised on the desolate moon of Lycaeus, which had been a vassal of the independent Forge World of Kievar. Corax organized a rebellion that overthrew Kievar's control of the enslaved people of Lycaeus, a feat for which Corax's homeworld was renamed Deliverance. His skills leading a guerrilla rebellion translated well to his command of the Raven Guard after he had been found by the Emperor. During the Great Crusade, Corax often fought under the command of Horus. He and his legion had proven to possess an unmatched skill at covert operations, sabotage, infiltration, and lightning assaults. But Horus and Corvax had never really liked each other. After one instance of disagreement, the two argued and nearly came to blows. Horus never even considered asking Corvus to join his rebellion. Vulkan was the commander of the fire-wielding Salamanders Legion. He was physically the strongest of the Primarchs. He was known to deliberately hold back in sparring matches with his brothers for fear of injuring them. But Vulkan had matured on the volcanic world of Nocturne, a dangerous planet whose people formed extremely close-knit communities. This culture bred in Vulkan 2 traits sometimes lacking in the other Primarchs: patience and deep compassion for human life. Of all their number, the Primarchs had generally agreed that Vulkan would be the most suited to life in an Imperium at peace. The Raven Guard and the Salamanders were surprised when they arrived at Isstvan V that the local space was apparently deserted. Achieving orbital superiority over the unpopulated planet, they carried out reconnaissance missions on the Traitors' position. The survey determined that it would require a full-scale ground assault to destroy the Traitors' fortifications. Fulgrim had chosen a ruined alien fortress on the edge of a desert bowl called the Urgal Depression for the Traitor Legions to make their stand. The Loyalists were troubled to learn that elements of the Mechanicum had also gone over to the War Master. These tech priests had established a vast network of redoubts around the fortress, complete with anti-aircraft and surface-to-air missile batteries. The fortress itself was reinforced with a defensive energy shield generator. These overlapping defenses made an orbital bombardment by the Loyalist fleet impossible. As the 2 Primarchs debated their course of action, Ferrus Manus arrived in system. Ferrus had been so eager to assault the traitors that he arrived with only 10 companies of his legion's most experienced veterans. The rest of his legion would not arrive in time for the initial assault. Ferrus was not overly concerned by this, since he would be commanding the forces of 6 other legions. Ferrus immediately contacted his counterparts and ordered them to use orbital barrages as cover for a drop pod assault by all 3 Loyalist legions. Ferrus's brothers hesitated, believing that they should wait for the other 4 incoming legions. But when Ferrus learned their reinforcements were only hours away from translating in system, he ordered an immediate attack. The other 4 legions would land after them and form a second wave. The plan for the first assault was quickly decided. Corax would secure the battlefield's right flank, Vulkan the left, while Ferrus Manus and the Iron Hands pushed through the center. On the surface, the traitors assembled in front of the fortress, with their artillery and titans to the rear. However, the battle to come would be fought by heavy infantry wielding bolters and chainswords, brother against brother. The sky above the Urgal Depression was soon blackened as thousands of drop pods rained from the fleet above. As each drop pod landed, it disgorged its cargo of space marines, who immediately began assaulting the traitors. Dropships followed behind, swiftly unleashing their precious vehicles and war machines before lifting off for another run. Within minutes, the entire Loyalist first wave had made planetfall. Then the slaughter began in earnest. The carnage was terrible, on a scale the galaxy had never seen before, as the largest forces of Space Marines ever engaged spilled each other's blood. Yet it seemed that Ferrus and his Loyalist brothers were carrying the day. Within only hours of their planetfall, the Loyalists had driven a sharp wedge deep into the enemy position. At the forefront was the black armored figure of Ferrus Manus and his personal retinue of Morlock Terminators. Together they cleaved, hacked, and shot the hated traitors before them as Ferrus barked curt orders to his troops. For the Iron Hands Primarch, this was not a battle. This was vengeance for a betrayal so foul it was hard to contemplate. Ferrus hungered for the chance to relinquish the burden of command so he could seek out Fulgrim for a final duel. He ached to settle once and for all the grudge that had turned their friendship to bitter hatred. It was at this point of maximum pressure that the Raven Guard made their move, launching a jump pack assault into the traitors' right flank. But Angron had positioned many of his World Eaters in ambush, waiting for this maneuver. The World Eaters slew many Raven Guard, giving new heart to the traitor defenders. The traitors managed to stabilize their line at this point, and even Ferrus's forward momentum was halted by the unexpected sonic attacks of the Emperor's Children's Noise Marines. These chaos-corrupted Space Marines now possessed many of the same abilities as the Slaaneshi war singers they once faced on Isstvan III. As the combat seemed about to break down into a series of largely individual duels driven by long-simmering hate and resentment, the Loyalists were bolstered by the reinforcements. 3 hours into the combat, they heard the roar of the Night Lord's Legion's landing craft breaking through the cloud cover above the Urgal Depression. Within minutes, the drop craft of the Loyalist second wave were identified, as the Iron Warriors, the Alpha Legion, and the Word Bearers joined the Night Lords. They quickly deployed their Astartes around the perimeter of the Great Desert Bowl. As the newly arrived legions set down on Isstvan V's surface, the Traitor Legions seemed to lose their heart for the fight once the Imperial presence more than doubled. They began to withdraw from their prepared emplacements and bunkers. It was at this moment that Ferrus finally located Fulgrim's command position in the center of the traitor line. He ordered his Morlocks to assault it, though Corax and Vulkan urged him to fall back. Their Raven Guard and Salamanders legions had taken thousands of casualties. Both thought it better to consolidate their positions and let the second wave continue the fight while they regrouped. Ferrus would have none of it now that Fulgrim was within his grasp. He ordered his Iron Hands forward. When Ferrus refused to follow his brother's advice, they apparently chose to leave him unsupported rather than aid his sudden assault. Only months before, Ferrus had been confronted by Fulgrim, long his closest friend among the Primarchs. Fulgrim had believed he could convince Ferrus to betray the Emperor and join the War Master's cause. But the Gorgon was shocked and angered at the suggestion, and a vicious fight had erupted between the pair. Ferrus had attempted to use his silver hands to destroy Fulgrim's golden sword fireblade, but the resulting explosion knocked him unconscious. Fulgrim had been unable to kill his old friend. Instead, he opted to take his personal weapon, the Warhammer Forgebreaker, and leave Fireblade behind. Fulgrim had forged the hammer, and Ferrus the sword. They had exchanged the weapons as a sign of their brotherhood, and Fulgrim took Forgebreaker back to remember his lost bond with the Iron Hands Primarch. Fulgrim escaped the Iron Hands fleet, but not before killing many Morlocks and badly damaging the 10th Legion's vessels. Now Ferrus was ready for the rematch. The Terminator armored elite of the Iron Hands struck the Emperor's Children's command post and engaged in furious battle with Fulgrim's own elite, the Phoenix Guard. Ferrus at last confronted Fulgrim, though they chose to duel at first with words rather than weapons. Fulgrim smiled at his brother's fury. He explained that he had made his offer out of friendship, not betrayal, for the Emperor was a spent force. Horus offered a new order for the Imperium. Ferrus replied that Horus's actions were driven only by a lust for power that did not belong to him. He promised Fulgrim that the War Master had already been defeated by the assembled might of the Imperium. At that point, Fulgrim could no longer hold back his laughter. He pointed at the second wave of legions who spread all around the perimeter of the Urgal Depression. With a triumphant grin, Fulgrim declared, "The legions you see there are not loyal to the Emperor. They are all sworn to Horus." Almost on cue, a single flare was suddenly fired from the War Master's command post, This was the prearranged signal for the second wave's legions to open fire, now revealed as the traitors they were. Just as Horus had expected, Ferrus's desperate anger and desire to kill Fulgrim led him to spread his loyalist forces too thin across the Urgal Depression. The first salvo ripped into the Raven Guard and Salamanders, killing thousands. The Traitor Legions, having suddenly increased in number from 4 to 8, drew the noose tight around the Loyalists. As fire poured down upon the Salamanders and Raven Guard Space Marines trapped in the Depression from all sides, the battle rapidly became a massacre. At the same time, the retreat of the original 4 Traitor Legions was revealed to be a sham. They suddenly turned and brought their weapons to bear on the Iron Hands in their midst. Hopelessly outnumbered, the entire Loyalist army was soon shattered as an effective fighting force. Fulgrim laughed once more at the expression on his old friend's face as the black act of betrayal unfolded all around him. With mounting horror, Ferrus realized that there would be no escape from the War Master's trap for the Loyalist Legions. He turned back to Fulgrim with a grim expression and his weapon raised. The two Primarchs leapt at each other, unleashing their raw hate. Ferrus, wielding his brother's reforged sword Fireblade, clashed against Fulgrim's chosen weapon, the stolen Warhammer Forgebreaker. The Iron Hands Primarch at first proved the stronger, and nearly decapitated Fulgrim with his own flaming blade. In fear of losing his life, Fulgrim drew his second weapon, the demon-possessed sword he had taken from the Xenos world of Leyrin, to block Ferrus's killing stroke. The Silver Sword's unleashed chaos power allowed him to cut deeply into Ferrus's chest, bypassing his thick armor and causing him to fall to his knees. As Fulgrim moved to deliver the coup de grace, he suddenly hesitated, unwilling to deliver the killing blow. He saw in that moment the monster he had become, and the terrible evil he had willingly assisted. But Fulgrim also realized he had come too far to stop, and that everything he had once believed in was already ashes. The demon within the silver blade guided his hand, granting him the fortitude to do what must be done. As Ferrus took advantage of his brother's hesitation to reach for his own sword, the blade of the lair came down with a single, sure stroke, decapitating the Primarch of the Iron Hands Legion. Fulgrim's soul was lost forever in the same instant. Ferrus was not the only Primarch believed to die that day. Vulkan and many of his Salamanders were hit by tactical nuclear weapons and thought vaporized. The Raven Guard fared little better. Some stragglers sought to escape with Corvax before their Thunderhawk was shot down somewhere over the desert plains beyond the Urgal Depression. Horus had succeeded in the extraordinary feat of destroying 3 full Space Marine legions in a single day. It was not for nothing that the campaign on Isstvan V would be remembered forever after as the Drop Site Massacre. He had once again displayed unparalleled strategic genius. He had transformed a failure to make Ferrus Manus an ally into the seed of his destruction and that of 2 other Loyalist Primarchs. But Horus understood that he was not infallible. Even with the knowledge provided by his allies in the Warp, he had mistakenly believed that Ferrus was vulnerable to Fulgrim's persuasion. Worse, both of his initial victories had wholly depended upon the element of surprise. That was now gone. His enemies knew he was coming for them, and they would be ready. Horus had to defeat the Emperor and his remaining loyal sons quickly, before the full weight of the Imperium could be brought to bear. Eager to claim his prize, the War Master ordered his fleet to leave the Isstvan system behind. The fight to claim Terra had begun.